My first happy childhood memory was down the park getting off my nuts.
Josh Connolly.
Josh Connolly.
Josh Connolly. I chopped the end of my foot off in a machine at work. So I was going to get a big payout for that, which would have cleared my debt. And my best mate said to me, "You're going to piss that up the wall." You know that. I used to fantasize about getting the money and booking into a hotel for a week and just going out in a blaze of glory. And that's how I saw it. I remember saying around 6 months sober, I've never been angry about the way that my dad was. And then I thought about it and I thought, well, that ain't right. And then I think, I've never been angry about, I'm fighting at football every week from the age of 19 and fighting wherever I get a chance. But I've never been angry about what happened to my dad. There was such big, painful emotions that I went through. You know, I found ways to deal with them.
Elliott Wald, addiction specialist. Coming clean with me.
Hello, I'm Elliott Wald, addiction specialist, and welcome to another episode of Coming Clean with me. And here in the studio today with me is Josh Connolly. Well, Josh is going to share his story about addiction and his sobriety. Josh is a certified breathwork and resilience coach, author of It's Them, Not You, How to Break Free from Toxic Parents and Reclaim Your Story. And Josh is also a proud father of 6. Wow, 6, Josh. Wow, fucking hell, good to meet you, Josh.
That's why I'm a resilience coach.
Yeah, that's it.
There's 6
so,
kids.
Josh, tell me what it was like growing up for you.
Look, I think if I'm going to tell you what it's like to grow up, I think it's important to say that my reality of what I believed was true when I was younger growing up changed in my sobriety. Yeah? Until I got sober, I believed that my childhood was sort of normal and idyllic. But in sobriety, I've started to see my childhood for what it was. And I think particularly in like those initial years, particularly the first 9, I grew up with an alcoholic father. So my dad was quite a like violent, angry, chaotic man, scared me when he was drunk and scared me when he was sober. And so it was difficult, you know. I grew up with two brothers, and though I can't necessarily like recall a lot of the experiences, I've got like a knowing that it was difficult and sort of shaped the way that I see the world today.
Do you think the reason you can't recall some of those experiences, you're protecting yourself from that?
I think some of it is that, because some of it comes back, but I think also I spent a lot of my childhood disassociated as well. Because I still get it in my adulthood, yeah? Like my wife, the people around me will say that I've got a really bad memory, but I actually think that it's not necessarily always a bad memory. It's that I'm so up in my head in the moment that I'm not actually living it fully enough for it to go in. So I think I don't recall a lot of it for that reason. When you think about it, incredible way of surviving in the environment I grew up in, yeah, probably causes me a few struggles as an adult because it happens so often, you know. So
you said that you grew up with you and your 2 siblings with an alcoholic father who you didn't really know whether he was going to be angry or whether he was going to be, what his mood was going to be like. So tell me about what that was like for you.
Well, you become like an expert at reading rooms, yeah. I like lived a life of hypervigilance. You're always sort of that walking on eggshells environment. I could tell you exactly how drunk my dad was by the sound that his feet made on the stones when he walked up to the door on his way home. Yeah, because the way that I showed up within that household as a child was reactive to the way that my dad showed up with the ways that he drank. Yeah, so like even the volume of the TV, the way that he breathed, the way that he looked, I was so tuned into it all of the time. And when I look back, I was always self-organizing. So I only knew who to be based on how I read the room. So rather than developing like a full and healthy sense of self, I developed a self based around the people in front of me. And that's stayed with me. It stays with me still today. I have to work to not abandon myself and just work out who you want me to be and become that. Look, there's positives from it as well. You know, I've got that sort of personality where you could put me in a prison and I'll act like a criminal, put me in a church, I'll act like a vicar. Yeah, do you know what I mean? Like I'd be able to fit into both of them because that's what I did all my life. A chameleon, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. And it wasn't just alcohol with your father, was it? It was drugs as well?
Yeah, look, I didn't know when I was a kid it was drugs. Like I learned that my dad did drugs when they taught me not to do drugs at school. And that's one of the things that I think it's changing now. But we had lessons on how bad drugs were, and it was only in them lessons that I was like, oh, that's what my dad does. I don't think he had I don't think it was bad with the drugs until he went to prison when I was like 5, and he was in prison for a couple of years. Then when he came out of prison, that's when we used to go and visit him in his flat, you know? And that's when I started seeing him do.
Your mum remarried while he was in prison, that's right, isn't it?
She met my stepdad when he was in prison. I think they didn't get married till years later, but yeah, she met my stepdad, who she's still with now.
What was your relationship like with him?
My stepdad? Yeah. He's a good guy. Like, we're still close today. You know, I know him well. But, and I think this is important, he's like your stereotypical man's man, right? So he's quite strong. He's a builder. He's got quite like strong views on the ways that he sees the world. None of that's an issue unless for the first 6 years of your life, you saw a man that was exactly like that, and he scared you and made you think that those people like that are a certain way. So I was always wary. And I mean, it's only been the last few years that I've stopped being so wary of men like that.
Alpha males.
Alpha males, yeah. Now, don't get me wrong, like, they've always been my mates. I spent my lifetime trying to impress men like that, yeah? Trying to be a man like that. From the very moment that I started to turn into a man, I wanted to be a man like that. But I always also believed that men like that hurt you, and it will all end bad, you know? So I never had a close, loving relationship with my stepdad when I was young. And I never allowed myself to have caring relationships with men in general, and until I started doing, you know, some work on it in more recent years.
Yeah. And you tell me you were at your dad's when you were 9 years old with your brothers, and you found your dad. Tell me about that.
It was less that I found him and that more that I was there. Like, essentially I was there when he decided he didn't want to be here anymore. I should stipulate and say that, and this is quite important actually, on his death certificate it says misadventure. Yeah. It wasn't misadventure. I know what my dad was doing. And he basically took a load of tablets, and I saw him have a seizure on the floor. And my mum used to ring the phone regularly in there, and when she rang the phone, I said, you know, Dad's really drunk, you need to pick us up. And my mum picked us up, and we went home. And then I found out on the Tuesday at school that he had died, and that was the Sunday. Yeah.
How did you process that?
Well, I didn't process it. I think, like, look, when I was that young, when I remember the funeral, lots of adults told me at the funeral to be brave. Some of them told me to be brave for my mum, yeah? And if you think about what they're saying there, the adults are saying to me, your mum's got enough on her plate, don't you cry here neither. So in many ways, society taught me to be brave, to suppress my emotions. So I did that. And I think, like, again, it wasn't until I started looking at myself when I eventually got sober that you start to realize that you didn't process it. I remember saying around 6 months sober, I've never been angry about the way that my dad was. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, that ain't right. And then I think, I've never been angry about, I'm fighting at football every week from the age of 19 and fighting wherever I get a chance. But I've never been angry about what happened to my dad. And you see what happens is that it comes out of you sideways, yeah?
Of course.
So the emotions that I weren't able to process, and listen, I think I had to protect myself from them because they were, you know, there was such big, painful emotions that I went through. You know, I found ways to deal with them.
Yeah. And also, I read from my research team that you said that after your dad passed away, nobody spoke about him. There was no celebration of any anniversaries. There was no photos. There was nothing to remind you of him.
I couldn't even tell you now what date my dad died on. I couldn't tell you the date of my dad's birthday. There's no pictures of my dad in my house. There's no pictures of my dad in my house. Maybe that's a continuation of what we experienced. But no, like, my family don't talk about it at all.
Your choice to have no pictures in your house?
I don't have many pictures. But yeah, it obviously is my choice, yeah, because I've got some and they end up in my house, yeah.
But you've got some. You've kept them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something telling in itself.
Yeah.
I remember with myself, when I read that, it recalled to me, because I remember that when my dad was killed when I was 6, no one ever spoke about my dad again. There was no pictures, no nothing. In fact, I never got a picture until I found an aunt that I didn't even know existed. When I was like 40 years old, she put an advert in the Evening Standard and somebody said, this is you. And I met my aunt, who was my dad's sister, I didn't even know existed, and she gave me a whole load of pictures of my dad that I'd never had before.
Yeah.
So I know that's that must play on you, right? That must be difficult.
Look, I think when I was a kid, it was just normal, yeah? So I didn't know any different. I think the way that my mum dealt with it, and she didn't get any support in what she went through. She moved on, and I think it was all too painful, so you put it in the box, right? But the way that I look at it with my dad, right, is most people that knew my dad tell me my dad was an amazing man and drink got hold of him, yeah? I don't remember that. I don't remember good moments with my dad. And that's not easy to say, yeah? But I don't remember that. That's just my truth. And so if I think about, and I'm just exploring this as we go, but if I was to think about putting a picture of my dad up on the mantelpiece, like what I don't know, what am I trying to remember there? I don't have good memories.
I understand that. But do you think having that, not having good memories about your dad, not having that relationship, do you think that's made you a better father? Do you think you've gone, I can speak for myself. I know that my relationship with my children is tight because I didn't have that. So I was always yearning for the family I never had.
Yeah.
Did you find that?
It has now,
right?
But I had children before I got sober, yeah?
Okay.
So look, I have to say that at the beginning, no, it didn't, yeah? I became my dad. But now, yes, like it shapes who I am as a dad, because people say to me all the time, like, what do you want from life? Like, if you could think about what you want to achieve in life, I'm telling you now, above anything, and I do a lot of stuff, a lot of different stuff, and, get to do a lot of amazing things as a result of the work that I do. The one thing that drives me is that when I'm gone, my grandkids and even my great grandkids, there'll be a picture of me on the wall. And when somebody says, who's that? They'll be able to say, that's your granddad. And he was a good man. And let me tell you some good stories about your dad. And the reason I can't do that with my kids, when they ask me about my dad, I say he was not well and he died when I was young. That's all I got, and like, that's sad, man. That's really sad. And we can dress that up in a new way if you want, and you can reframe it and try and make it nice. But the truth, the ultimate truth of it is that it's not nice and it's sad. And that's it, So it does drive me. That drives me for sure.
Yeah. And also when you were young, you got into football violence, like from the age of 15, I think.
So I was involved in sort of, they call it county lines now, yeah?
County lines?
County lines, you know what that is?
I don't know what that is.
So I grew up in a place called Swindon, and we used to have some people that would come from London with drugs and get me to sell them for them, yeah? So I did that until I was about 15, 16, and then when I left school, as soon as I got into pub culture, I started going to the pub, I was so drawn to football violence. And then, yeah, that took off when I was like...
That was a way of releasing some sort of pent-up thing from your childhood?
I think it's two things. If I look at the pattern from like the gangs when I was a kid to the football violence, both of them, I was always trying to impress the top boy. So in the football violence...
To belong.
The top man, I wanted him to love me. Yeah, so it's obvious. I was looking for a father figure, yeah? But both of them things gave me meaning. They gave me a sense of belonging. They gave me a sense of camaraderie. I got to get rid of those big emotions, yeah? I released that stuff on the weekends when we went to football. And listen, make no mistake, a lot of it was bravado, yeah? But it was drugs, it was alcohol, and it was violence. And make no mistake about it, I fucking loved it, right? I loved it. And even now when I talk about it, and even with the life that I live today, I can feel a part of my body light up at the excitement that I got out of it, yeah.
It's adrenaline buzz.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah. And how did your addiction begin? How did it start?
For me, it started with cannabis when I was about 12. We used to smoke hash. I don't even know if it's about nowadays.
Solid ash, yes.
Hash, yeah.
Listen, I got to tell you something. I was in Morocco. Whoa, I'm about 19 years old. And there was a war on, I remember. And I'm staying in this hotel with this guy who's in the Air Force from the Moroccan Air Force. And I used to smoke a bit of weed back then, or solid ash. And I remember saying to him, oh, can you get me like a £10 worth? Like equivalent of £10 in Morocco, right? Like you come back with like £10 worth in the UK, you get this. He gave me this thing, it's like the size of a matchbox. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, I used to smoke ash back in.
Yeah, so that's what, you couldn't, like cannabis, like weed as it is now, yeah? Well, it came in before I quit, but that wasn't a thing. I remember the first time we bought a $5 worth of cannabis, actual weed, yeah, and we were like, what the fuck, like there's nothing here, because we used to buy the puff, but then we'd smoke it in a bong, you know, like a big water pipe.
You didn't mess about. You went straight for it.
Yeah, no, we hung about down the park smoking bong, yeah. That was like what we did. And then on the weekends, alcohol got introduced. And like quickly I was selling puff because I'm like, but not to make money, to make sure I had enough to
fund your own habit.
to fund my habit, yeah. And then alcohol followed very quickly. And then pills. When we was about 14, like ecstasy pills were massive. So we'd go down the park, you'd take loads of pills, and just get off your nut. And I lived for that. And like the key thing here, and I think this is important, my life got good then. I was at this mental health thing a while back, like a children's mental health thing, and the woman got to do a visualization, and she said, remember the first time, the first happy childhood memory, yeah? People talking about, I don't know, fucking Disneyland, and my first happy childhood memory was down the park getting off my nut, yeah?
Really?
Yeah, and like that wasn't because I went to the wrong place. That's when I remember like very clearly thinking, life's all right, man. Like as long as I don't end up like my dad, and I won't, you know, I'll make sure that I don't. If I got drink, drugs, I'm gonna be fine. And I like the cannabis stayed constant throughout my whole life until I quit. The alcohol was a regular thing, and then like you went with pills, and then like trips and mushrooms were about for a bit, and then cocaine came in more with the football stuff. That's when I started getting involved in cocaine when I was probably more like 18, 19. Because before that, it was like very expensive, yeah? So like it just wasn't done as much. And then we all started doing it, yeah, when I was like 18, 19.
And how did that escalate your usage of that?
Cocaine was always bad because like as soon as I started doing cocaine, then I knew like I wanted it all the time. Cause like, you know how Moorish it is, right? And so then I started selling it. But of course, when you're selling it and you're just somebody that uses in the way that I did, you're not selling it. You're fucking waking up in the, you know, 2 days later and it's all gone. So then I used to mix it with, there used to be a lad that come up from up north, used to come down south and give me a load of cocaine, and I'd mix it with creatine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I use creatine in the gym all the time.
Yeah. So I use it in the gym now, but I used to use it. I didn't know what it was back then. But then I'd get in so much bother that I used to have to, I would bag up loads of creatine and have to get the train to different towns to go in nightclubs and sell just creatine, no cocaine in it at all, and then get out of the town before like
Before someone finds you.
Yeah. So I was always chasing my tail, and I got in a lot of debt as a result of that. You know, like we used to, I think they banned them all now, but we used to have like payday loans and stuff like that. So I'd get all these, and then I always worked, had a job in a factory. I'd have to get my wages put into my mate's bank because my banks were all fucked, and so it was chaos. And I had a couple of like near sort of, well, there was one bad suicide attempt when I was about 21 using cocaine. And I was struggling, man.
Was that the time that you like, went to see your kids and you thought, this is the last time I'm going to see them?
No, that came slightly later. This was, we was in Blackpool for a football thing, and I got punched in the face, and I snapped my jaw in 2 places on the right side, and it dislocated on the left side. And so I got a taxi to the hospital, and I had a load of cocaine on me because I used to take plenty to like sell everyone so that I could get through the weekend and have money. And when I got there, they said they had to transfer me to Preston because I had to have this emergency surgery on my face, and they couldn't do it at Blackpool. And then they gave me intravenous morphine to deal with the pain while I waited. And I just thought, well, I got enough cocaine here. If I do all of it while I got morphine going in me, it'll probably do the job. And so I went in the toilets and did it. And then I had like a seizure in the ambulance on the way to Preston. And then I literally woke up the next day. They had done the surgery on me. They said they were concerned about some things that happened, and they wanted to keep me in for a few days. And then I just got out of there. I got metal plates in my jaw and stuff like that. But I remember just being so disappointed that it didn't work.
And what age did you hit your peak of addiction? And what were the negative consequences of that?
So my first daughter was born when I was 18. And I think up until then, up until I had kids, there was no obvious consequences to me. And I'll be clear, yeah, like prison didn't scare me because prison appealed to me. Because I used to just sort of think, at least I'll be in a like institution where I get up every day. Now listen, I never ended up in prison, and I know I'm oversimplifying it, but that's the way that I used to see it. So up until I was 18, there was loads of bad stuff. Like I had some real near misses with particularly ecstasy, because I lived a life. I remember like somebody said to me, how many pills do you reckon you'd have to take at once for it to kill you? And somebody said, I reckon if you did 10 in one go, it would get close. So I did it. I was like, well, let me see. That's how I lived. Like, so there was less consequences there, but I was perhaps more erratic. Once my kids were born, things got bad, and I would spike and go down. This is the key thing, yeah? Like, I think people often think that addiction is this like constant, like you end up just doing it all day, every day. And I would have periods like that, and then periods where I would sober up, stop everything for a couple of weeks, prove I ain't got a problem, and then I'd be, I'd try and keep it under wraps again for a bit after that, and then it would all take off again. The one constant was cannabis, and cannabis never really caused me any issues, but alcohol was bad. The alcohol was bad. But once I got to 24, I'd had 4 kids in that previous marriage. That had broken down. I was £17,000 in debt. I was on a fold-out bed in my mum's house, and that's when it was bad. That's when I really, really woke up every morning not wanting to be here. Yeah.
That's when you were in a dark place.
Yeah.
And what was the final straw that made you decide, right, like, fuck it, right, this is time to get sober now?
It was a series of events. That thing that happened with my jaw had happened, and all of the lads that I thought had my back and were like there for me, that I used to go to football with, they all left me in Preston. So when I woke up, they'd all gone. So I had to get home on my own. So I was like starting to think like I'm on my own here. I'd also, and I don't need to go into it because it's a boring story, but it's quite traumatic. I chopped the end of my foot off in a machine at work, right? So I was going to get a big payout for that, which would have cleared my debt and got me set up. And so I was living at my mum's house, drinking every day, but saying to everybody, when I get this money, everything's going to be all right. And my best mate said to me, and he was right, he said, when you get that money, you won't pay that debt off. He's like, you're gonna piss that up the wall. You know that? And I was like, yeah. I used to fantasize about getting the money and booking into a hotel for a week and just going out in a blaze of glory. That's how I saw it. So these series of events happened, and then literally the last day that I drank was the day, I don't know if you're a football fan, but when Aguero...
I've got to be honest, because I have another guest in today who's a football pundit. I know nothing about football, so no, I know nothing about football.
A lot of people will know that in 2012, Aguero, Man City striker, scored a goal in the last kick of the game, and it won Man City the league when they were about to lose it, right? And it was carnage. And I was in the pub that day, and the landlord of the pub happened to be an ex-compulsive gambler, and he was about 18 months free, and he took me to a 12-step meeting on the Monday, and I haven't used alcohol and drugs since that day, yeah.
And that was 14th of May 2012, according to my notes.
2012, yeah. So I've just celebrated 12 years. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks, mate.
Congratulations. Yeah, it's an interesting story, sorry, as I talk to many people about similar... Do you know what? Before I go any further, do you want to smoke a joint with me? Let me show you this. Let me show you. Listen, there's a guy called Dr. Richard Bandler who created neurolinguistic programming. He's a very, very good friend of mine. He's super intelligent. I think he has 5 PhDs. He's written like 100 books, right? And he taught me this. So this isn't my own thing, right? You take the 4 corners of the universe. Just do this for me. So you can see 4 corners in between your fingers. You got that? Okay. So we're going to do this. I'm going to go first. I'm going to take a little hit of the joint, like, good hold it. Yeah, man, that's fucking good shit, man. Hold on. Yeah, man, fuck. Yeah, man, what do you think?
So you want me to chug this?
Fuck yeah, man, chug it, man, have a good pull. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Now, let me explain something, right? Now, here's an interesting thing. You can start to feel a little tingle in your head, right? Just a little touch, right? Because you've been used to smoking weed, right? Mm. Now, the brain has an ability to remember everything you've done, and you've only ever done that with a joint, or ever done that with a joint, right? So your brain suddenly remembers. Let me show you how I can take this a step further. Take your finger and a thumb. So anyone watching can do this at home, right? And do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go, and you see your mum go slightly mum, right, so.
Yeah.
Because the only person that's ever done that is an anaesthetist when you're in a dentist giving you an injection. So you can replicate the feeling of any drug. Yeah, you feel it, right? It's numb. You're like,
weird,
fuck, man, my face is going numb. Because your brain relates and associates to everything it's done previously. And that's why people can get high just from sucking in air, just from air. Listen, you talk about breath work. Talk to me a bit about breath work. Because like we're coming down that path.
Yeah, well, that's like the, when we was just doing that thing, when I was breathing in, I was like, if that's the kind of feeling I get from breath work. Yeah. But I discovered breath work like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And I think similar to some of the stuff maybe that you just talked about there, I'd done a lot of talking and rationalizing about my experience. You know, I talked it till the cows come home. But I knew that I was still missing a lot. I still knew that it wasn't really, I wasn't reaching to the depths of what I'd experienced. And when I did breathwork, conscious connected breathwork for the first time, I really got into my body and had like a profound experience from being in my body. And it was once I'd done that, I knew very, very quickly I wanted to bring it into what I do. And so like, I think I've been certified now for 4 or 5 years, but...
and it's incredibly well received, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things that I really pride myself on with it is, I think what happens when people get into things like this is everybody says they want to take it to the normal average person on the street, but then they dress it all up in like tie-dye and fucking weird language, right? And I always try and think about the guy that I was when I was 24, because I'll talk about it in a second, but when I was 24 and I stopped drinking, life didn't get good. It got fucking horrible for me, like, quickly, yeah. And at 24, I ain't going to some bloke who's talking about transcending consciousness and he ain't wearing no shoes and socks and he's got tie-dye trousers on, yeah. I ain't going there. I'd fucking love that stuff now and I'm up for it and I'll go and do them things and I'm in it and I love it. But when I needed it the most, I ain't going there. Now, if a bloke talks to me in the language that I understand, so when I say breathwork, I say, look, we're going to do this for 25 minutes. By the end of it, you're going to feel like you're off your nut, right? You're going to have an experience, right? I feel like you're speaking to the 24-year-old me who's going to go, all right, I'll give that a bash. Now, once they got their foot in the door, then they can go and they can do the tie-dye stuff and go wherever they want with it. But ultimately, the power's in the breathwork. The breathwork does the job. And so I've always prided myself on wanting to make it as reachable as I can. And at the first session I did online, 70 people turned up. Like by the third one, I think there was like 2,500 there.
Wow.
Online, yeah.
2,500.
Yeah.
That's impressive. That's impressive. Yeah, I really get what you say about the tie-dye trousers and the spirituality that can turn people off until they get into it. Because I remember being about 27 years old and I was doing huge seminars, motivational seminars, and I saw Tony Robbins do this thing where people walk over 1,000 degrees of hot coals at the end of it. Yeah. And I thought, wow, I'd love to have that at the end of my seminar. So I hired someone to do it and it was costing a lot of money. And I thought, let me figure out how to do this myself. So I found this guy called Tolly Birkin in Sweden who taught Tony Robbins. So I went out to Sweden to study with Tolly Birkin and he was very spiritual. I remember one day he says, he lives in a forest, right? We stayed in these tents and we had like shit in the ground and like you eat out of the ground. It was just like, you know, building fires, fire under your nails, you're filthy, you haven't washed, you haven't slept. And one day he says, like, we're going to go into my forest, we're going to hug trees. I'm looking at him like, fucking hug trees? Yeah, like, we're going to go and hug trees. Like, which tree do you want, El? Which tree do you want to hug? I'm like, what the fuck am I? Like, so I find that a real turn-off. But the way you've put it to say, listen, we can do breath work and you need to get off your nut. That's like appealing, right?
Yeah.
You're talking their language.
And I think like we need to normalize spirituality as just being at one with myself and being as present as I can be. Yeah. All of the other stuff is just how you're wearing it and how you're dressing it up. And I think, listen, I went through a phase probably in my early recovery where I was trying to, lean into spirituality. So I started talking different and I know where that came from. But today I know who I am. I have a deep spiritual practice, right? But I'm also not that guy. So I don't need to be that. I don't feel the need to prove to everybody that I'm spiritual by using words that really don't resonate with me. So I talk how I talk. And I think that's one of the reasons why the work that I've done has resonated with people, yeah? Because I've tried as much as I can to stay myself.
What do you think has been your greatest achievement in the last 12 years?
Greatest achievement in the last 12 years? Probably being the dad that I've become and the relationship that I've got with all 6 of my kids. My eldest will be 18 in July. And I guess, let me put it simply for you so that I can answer the question coherently. The greatest achievement of the last 12 years is that if any of my 6 kids went through the most unimaginable problem, even if they caused it themselves, they would phone me pretty quickly.
That's nice.
Yeah.
You're an ambassador for, do I pronounce it NACO? Is that how you pronounce it? NACOA, sorry.
Yeah.
National Association of Children of Alcoholics, and you're passionately involved with them. Tell me a little bit about that.
I discovered them when I was about a year sober, right? And so...
How old were you at that point?
About 25.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's important to say, you alluded to earlier the weekend that I had with my children that sort of changed everything, yeah. Up until 9 months into sobriety, I pretended that I loved it, but I fucking hated it. I hated being sober. I was 24, 12 years ago. There weren't sober, I know there's a lot of sober communities and stuff, which is great. Now, there weren't then. I was fucking weird in the eyes of everybody, yeah. And I didn't like being sober. I hated it. When I went to meetings, I would say things like, I love being sober. It's great. I'm so glad I've got myself, but I didn't mean it. I didn't feel it. And I was 9 months sober. I say it took me like 12 years to nearly drink myself to death. It took me 9 months to nearly sober myself to death. And that was because I couldn't deal with what I was.
Suddenly got the reality of everything that you'd been numbing out.
Yeah. And not just that, right? Not just that, but when I started feeling the things that I thought alcohol was causing, that was hard. But let me tell you, when I started behaving in some of the ways that I used to say I did that because I was steaming, and I'm starting to do, that's creeping in when I'm sober, then I just think, you know what, I'm a terrible person. So that's when I made the decision not to be here anymore. And I went to see my kids, and because I knew I was going to die, the past became irrelevant, the future was non-existent, and for the first time ever, I was present. I remember cuddling my girls and feeling it in a way that I'd never experienced, And that's when I changed my mind. And after that weekend, I made a commitment to being honest with myself. And when I walked into NACOA, that's when I started to realize that so many of the ways that I felt actually make perfect sense when I see my life in its entirety. I wasn't crazy. There wasn't something wrong with me. And I'd been reacting to the world in the best way that I knew how, based on the tools that I'd been given. And so when I found NACOA, there was no plan in government to support children affected by parents drinking. There was no specific funding, and we campaigned over years. I gave the lecture at the House of Commons 6 years ago. It was on the front page of the national papers the next day. And eventually we secured funding for children, specifically children affected by parents drinking. The government have just cut that. They cut that 2 years ago. So in this country, there's no specific funding for children affected by parents drinking. But NACOA is predominantly a free, anonymous helpline that anyone affected by parents drinking can call and speak to a trained helpline counsellor. And we get children as young as 5 years old calling up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Absolutely fucking heartbreaking. I don't want to glamorize using drugs, but people like to hear some of the crazy stories. So come on, share a crazy story with me.
You want to I'll give you...
Give me a crazy story, Josh.
This story is so crazy. People are going to think I'm making it up, right?
Let's hear it.
So I came out of a nightclub, and at the time I was selling ecstasy pills, right? I came out of a nightclub and I saw somebody that I sort of knew get beat up and have his phone robbed out of his pocket when he was on the floor. Now, because I was pilled up, I was all loved up and George going like that. So I've gone over to the police and I've seen it all. I fucking love him. Like, anything you need, take my number. I want to help him. Gave my number to the police. Went back to a house party in a place called Leiden. It's about 7:30 in the morning. We've been up all night, yeah? My phone goes. It's the police, right? They've gone, sorry, Mr. Connolly, if we've woke you up. I'm like, no, I've been up for hours, right?
I've been asleep.
They said, we want to act fast. We want to catch these people. Can you give a statement? I was like, yeah, definitely. I love him. It's like a great friend of mine, yeah. They was like, can we come and get you? I was like, oh no, you can't come here. I said, pick me up at the end of the road, yeah? So I went and waited at a bus stop on my own, right? So I've gone up to this bus stop and then I'm chatting to my mate and I'm going, when they get here, I'll just tell them exactly what happened and then they'll drop me back. It will all be fine, right? And then I kept coming back round and the girl that I thought was there wasn't even there. I was tripping out that bad, yeah? Anyway, the police turned up, got me in the car, they took me to the station. I have no idea how long I was in this interview room, right? But I do remember I kept going, what have I said so far? And then they would like repeat it to me, and then I've gone, can I go and use the toilet? So I've gone in the toilet at the police station, and I thought I'll splash water on my face. I'm trying to get myself back to some kind of normality. So I got the cold water, splashed it on my face. The next memory I have, I've come round, and I must have gone off on a bit of a rush, and I'm soaking. I look like I've jumped in a swimming pool. So I've obviously gone there and just fucking got carried away. So I've gone up to the door, and I've pulled the door back like that to check where they are, thinking I'm going to run, yeah. I've opened the door, and they're right there, and they put me straight back in the police car, and they dropped me back at the end of the road, and I walked back into that house party, and walked in there, and it was literally, because everyone's off their nut, it was literally like, all right, Josh, how was your police interview? And I was like, yeah, it was good, I think. And it wasn't until the next day, I would love to hear from them police officers. I mean, they must have had the right crack with me about it. And that is, I promise you, that is a true story. Yeah.
That's crazy. We do some crazy things under the influence, don't we? So tell us about your upcoming book out on the 11th of July. It's called It's Them, Not You, How to Break Free from Toxic Parents and Reclaim Your Story.
So I wrote this book last year, and throughout I've supported thousands of people that have grown up in dysfunction, and I've supported just as many people who have grown up with what I would call toxic and abusive parents. And I think we all know that if somebody is in your life and they are emotionally abusive and they're relentless with their emotional abuse, everybody would say to you, get that person out of your life. You need to get as far away from them. You're a victim of abuse. If it's your parent, for some reason in our culture, people still think that you have a sense of duty to have to reconcile with that parent, regardless of whether they change or how bad the abuse is. And so I realized this a few years ago and began supporting a lot of people through that, to either reconcile the relationship if it is reconcilable, or in lots of cases people have had to go no contact. And so yeah, I teamed up with Ebury Penguin, and it comes out in July. It's out for pre-sale now, pre-order now. So
do I get a signed copy? If I pay?
You can have a signed copy, mate. Yeah,
thank you.
You can come along to the book tour in July as well.
I'll happily be there. Wave a little flag for you.
But the interesting thing about the book, let me just say this, is that each chapter finishes with a QR code that you scan, and that'll take you to a breathwork to support the work that you've done. So the book will take you on a journey, really. It's based on an online program that I've ran. We're in the 10th cohort now of that program, and it's based around that. And I've seen the change in people, the change it's had in people's lives as a result of running that. So the book will take you on that journey. So if you grew up in any kind of dysfunction or difficult parents, then the book's definitely gonna be able to help.
It's funny talking about when you say that just because they're a parent, people feel that they maybe should have some sort of relationship with that parent, even though it's toxic or abusive, and they don't realize that they can step away from it. Because I remember myself, I told you I left home at 14 and a half from a very abusive upbringing, and I didn't really have anything to do with my mum ever again. And then I was about, I want to say somewhere around about the age of 30-ish, and obviously I've made it, if that's what you want to say, and you can get my details out there on the internet quite simply. And my mum sent me an email, so she's obviously gone out there, found my email address, sent me an email off my website, and she's written, if you don't allow me to see your kids, I will cut you out my will. So I'm going to tell you that my mum is very, very wealthy, like extremely wealthy. And I'm thinking, I haven't heard from you all these years. You never stopped this man doing the things he did to me. But I didn't want to just respond. I put my words back in. I stopped and I thought about it for a second. And the next day I answered and I went, if you can tell me why you let a man that wasn't even my father beat me, cane me, piss on me, etc., then I'll let you see my kids. And she sent me an email back. And this is really telling. She sent me an email back and she had cut and pasted the statutory law that it wasn't illegal to cane a child back then. Wow. And I went, Lock. And that was it?
Yeah. And I mean, firstly, that's harrowing, right? That's harrowing. And I think a lot of people struggle to comprehend that especially a mum could be like that with her children.
And I think that's what drove me to addiction.
Yeah. Well, like, look, do you know Gabor Mate?
Yes. Yeah, I actually have got him coming on my podcast, funny enough.
Have you?
Yes, I have.
He's
excellent.
He's a guy, mate.
Yeah.
I got a tattoo of him actually.
Have you? Yeah, I've got him coming on my podcast, so that'd be a great one.
He's like, he's like one of my favorite teachers. But he said that when he was working in Vancouver, that a lot of the drug addicts there, when they talked about taking heroin, right, they said that it was like a warm hug. And I think that if you go to some of the most deprived areas in the world, you'll find two things there, right? Lots of off licenses, and there's often lots of like spiritual places, churches and stuff like that. And it's because they both offer the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely, definitely. You said something. Genetics load the gun and your environment pulls the trigger. Expand on that.
Look, I don't believe that anybody is born destined to be an alcoholic or to be an addict. I don't think anybody's born destined to be that. I think that we all have characteristics and traits that either lend themselves to it or don't. Yeah. I know that I am highly sensitive. When I say highly sensitive, I mean I'm really intuitive. I'm very in tune with my surroundings, right? That can make the world seem quite difficult for me. I believe that is a genetical factor, yeah? However, I think if I grew up in a loving, nurturing environment where I had at least one, but preferably more emotionally available adults to help me express my emotions, to feel comfortable in myself, right? To help me build a life and a brain that I didn't want to escape from, then I think I would have had much less chance of being an alcoholic and an addict, because I think the environment does that. Now, I'll add to this, and I'm going to say this because I think it's important. We know that our brain does a lot of its developing on the outside, right? So the brain does a lot of its development based on the environment that we live in those initial years, right? That's pretty basic science now, yeah? I think we know that scientifically. I think we know that intuitively. If you are around a baby that is a newborn or anything even under 4 years, you can feel a sense of how delicate they are, of how whatever you do, whatever interaction with them, like, I better get this right, man, because they are fucking taking everything in. I think we know that scientifically. I think we know it intuitively. I think the reason it's not talked about at a policy level, as in at the government level, because if we admit how important those first, particularly 4, but maybe the 9, if we admitted how important they are, the solution to what we call mental health, the solution to addiction would be to adequately fund children's services, to fund people that support children, to properly fund the schools, and to fund families when they are raising young children. That would be the solution, yeah? And I think that we exist in a world at the moment that the government sit at the same table as the people that profit from the distress caused by not adequately doing that.
There's no question over that. What about the person that is brought up in a loving environment, financially secure, and still ends up with an addiction?
I would say look harder. It's a red flag to me when somebody tells me they grew up in a perfect environment.
You know, I am going to say this to you, because I'm on the same page as you, but I am going to say this. This is a fact. You are more likely to become an alcoholic if you have a genetic gene of having blue eyes because of the chromosome reaction to alcohol. And that's a fact.
Yeah.
So people with blue eyes have a slightly higher genetic predisposition to become an alcoholic. It doesn't mean just because you get blue eyes, well, I'm going to get pissed because I've got blue eyes. That's not the reason. But there is a slight increase in the genetic potential of them becoming an alcoholic. So my final question for you, Josh, should we have another joint? Yeah, man, that's fucking good. My final question to you that I ask every single guest on my show is, to anyone listening who's struggling with an addiction, what advice would you give to them?
Contact you, be the first bit of advice I give. And the second bit of advice, the first thing I would say is, like, well done for finding a way to get through, finding a way to deal with life in the way that you experience it. And then secondly, I would say, if you ever want to explore it, you don't have to think that I'm going to give it up for good necessarily. treat it like an experiment and say to yourself, let me do a period where I'm going to really give it a go and I'm going to try and stop it. Because when I look at where I was when I was 24 and I stopped drinking alcohol to where I am now, my life is immeasurable. And every fear and worry that I had about going sober has just come to nothing. You know, the usual fears, and people talk about, like, do you lose your friendship groups? Like, what the evenings are like? Are you still able to go out? They're not even questions. When people ask me them, I'm like, it's not even on my radar. My life is so full and so amazing. I don't like whether or not I can go out on a Friday night. I'm out all of the time doing what I love, you know? So, and I think that's accessible to anybody. And if you do it, the people that I meet that are in recovery are the greatest people I know. The ones that have been there, that have been to the edge and come back, they're the greatest people I know.
So you've got more resources and experiences in your life to enrich your life.
Yeah.
A final note, where can people who want to find breathwork, how can they find you?
Best things, go to my website. My website's just joshconnolly.co.uk, but you can find me on all socials on Josh_FFW. Everything's there. I'm offering a free mini retreat to anybody that pre-orders my book at the moment. And the book tour's out there. So if you want to come and try the breathwork, we'll be doing that on the tour as well.
Fantastic. Josh, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for coming clean with me.
Thank you, mate. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.